The story of Christina Formella does not begin with scandal. It begins quietly, in a small, ordinary environment, where nothing seemed out of place. Christina grew up in what many would describe as a typical American upbringing. There were no early warning signs, no obvious red flags. Friends described her as calm, soft-spoken, and responsible, the kind of person parents trusted, the kind of person schools welcomed. As she got older, Christina gravitated toward education. She chose a profession built on trust, teaching, a role that required patience, guidance, and influence. She wasn't just responsible for academics, she was responsible for shaping young minds. Students looked up to her, colleagues respected her, and to outsiders, her life appeared stable, predictable, safe. But behind that image, lines were beginning to blur. Boundaries that should never be crossed were slowly fading. At first, it may have seemed harmless, a little too friendly, a little too personal, but in environments built on authority, even small shifts can become dangerous, because when a teacher becomes more than a teacher, the balance of power changes, and that's where this story begins to turn. What started as admiration would soon become something far more serious, something hidden, something inappropriate, and eventually, something criminal. Inside the classroom, Christina Formella held authority, but outside of it, things began to change. Interactions with students became more personal, more frequent, more private. Communication extended beyond school hours, messages, conversations, attention that went beyond what a teacher should ever give to a student. This kind of attention can feel special, like being chosen, but in reality, it creates confusion and vulnerability. At some point, the relationship crossed a critical boundary. It was no longer professional. It was no longer appropriate. It became something that violated both ethical rules and the law. These situations rarely happen overnight. They build gradually, through trust, through secrecy, through emotional manipulation, and that's what made it difficult for others to notice at first. From the outside, everything still looked normal, but inside that hidden dynamic, lines had already been crossed. And once that happens, there is no going back. The risk grows, the consequences build, and eventually, the truth begins to surface. Because secrets like this don't stay hidden forever. The case began to unravel. When concerns were raised, sometimes it starts with a rumor, sometimes with a message, sometimes with a single detail that doesn't sit right. In this case, information reached authorities, and an investigation began, quietly at first, then more aggressively. Digital evidence became a key factor. Messages, communication records, patterns of contact, all examined carefully. As investigators built their case, the picture became clearer. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not accidental. It was a pattern. When Christina Formella was brought in for questioning, the tone shifted. What had been hidden was now being confronted. Investigators asked direct questions about communication, about intent, about boundaries. Her responses, according to reports, were inconsistent, at times defensive, at times minimizing. Paraphrased statements suggest she implied that the relationship was misunderstood, that emotions were involved, and that it wasn't meant to cause harm. But investigators focus on facts, not intentions, and the facts were difficult to deny, because in cases like this, power imbalance matters, consent becomes irrelevant, and responsibility falls entirely on the adult. The interrogation wasn't just about answers, it was about accountability, and by the end of it, the direction of the case was clear. Once the investigation became public, everything changed. The community reacted, parents, students, staff, all trying to process what had happened. A teacher, someone entrusted with children, had violated that trust. The fallout was immediate. Legal consequences followed, charges, court proceedings, public scrutiny, and a reputation that would never recover. But beyond the legal system, the deeper impact was on the students. Situations like this leave lasting effects: confusion, emotional harm, loss of trust, not just in one person, but in authority figures as a whole. Cases like Christina Formella's serve as a reminder of how important boundaries are, of how power must never be abused, and of how quickly a trusted position can be destroyed. In the end, this is not just a story about one teacher. It's a story about responsibility, about trust, and about the consequences when that trust is broken, because once that line is crossed, there is no undoing it. Only consequences, only impact, only a lasting reminder of what should never have happened.